The perfect life that wasn't. The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, and Lydia Hartwell watched the crystal fragments scatter like the pieces of her 15-year marriage. Her husband hadn't even looked up from his phone on their anniversary. In the penthouse, she decorated with her own hands, wearing the dress she'd bought, hoping he might notice. But Victor Kane never noticed anymore. Not her tears, not her effort, not the woman slowly disappearing in front of him. Tonight, something inside Lydia finally broke alongside that glass. And for the first time in years, she wondered what would happen if she stopped trying to hold everything together. If you're watching from a city where women rebuild themselves stronger than before, drop that city name in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And hit that like button, because Lydia's journey is just beginning, and you won't believe where it goes. The storm hit Chicago the way storms always did in October. Sudden, violent, and without apology, rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse apartment on Lakeshore Drive, each drop racing downward like tears the glass couldn't hold back. Lightning split the sky over Lake Michigan, illuminating the darkened city in brief, stark flashes that made everything look like a photograph. Frozen, lifeless, caught in a moment that couldn't last. Lydia Hartwell stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she adjusted the candles on the dining table for the third time. Everything had to be perfect. It always had to be perfect. She'd spent the entire day preparing. The Chilean sea bass with lemon butter sauce, Victor's favorite, though he rarely ate at home anymore. Wild mushroom risotto made from scratch, the way his mother used to make it before she'd stopped speaking to Lydia, for reasons that had never been fully explained. Some transgression Lydia had committed without knowing. Some failure to meet standards she'd never been told existed. A chocolate torte from that bakery in Lincoln Park, the one she'd taken the train to because Victor's driver had been unavailable again. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and butter and expensive wine. Lydia had opened a bottle of the Burgundy Victor kept locked to the temperature-controlled wine cellar, the one he saved for special occasions that never seemed to materialize. If their 15th anniversary wasn't special enough, she didn't know what was. 15 years. 15 years deserved more than takeout or another business dinner where she'd sit beside him smiling at strangers while he discussed mergers and market shares and leverage ratios as if she were part of the furniture. Beautiful furniture. Maybe something to be admired and then ignored, but furniture nonetheless. The candles flickered in the draft from the air conditioning. Lydia checked her watch. 7:47 p.m. Victor had texted at 6, running late. Start without me. She hadn't started without him. She'd waited, watching the food grow cold, listening to the storm intensify outside, feeling something dark and familiar coil in her chest. It wasn't anger. Not yet. Anger required energy, required the belief that expressing it might actually change something. And Lydia had learned over the years to conserve her energy for the things that might actually make a difference. This was something else. This was the slow, steady erosion of hope, like watching a coastline disappear, one wave at a time until you couldn't remember what the shore used to look like. At 8:15, the elevator chimed. Lydia straightened automatically, smoothing down her dress. A deep emerald silk she'd chosen because Victor once said it made her eyes look luminous. That had been 7 years ago, maybe 8. She couldn't quite remember. The memories that mattered had a way of blurring at the edges, while the painful ones remained sharp and clear as broken glass. Victor stepped into the apartment, his suit immaculate despite the storm, his charcoal tie still perfectly knotted. His dark hair was barely touched by rain. Of course, he'd been in the car, probably on a call, probably discussing something more important than coming home to his wife. "Hey," he said, not quite looking at her as he set his briefcase down by the door with the same precise movement he used every night. Everything Victor did was precise, calculated. He built an empire knowing exactly where to place his pieces on the board. "Hey." Lydia's voice came out softer than she'd intended, almost apologetic. She hated the sound of it, the way she'd learned to make herself smaller, quieter, less demanding. "I made dinner." Victor glanced toward the dining room where the candles still burned despite the waste of wax, despite the absurdity of romance. Purchased at a specialty store for $43 a set because the website promised they were hand-poured by artisans in Vermont and smelled like autumn in the countryside. I ate at the office, he said, loosening his tie with one hand while checking his phone with the other. Morrison brought in Thai, some new place in the loop everyone's talking about. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples, then nothing. It's our anniversary, Lydia said quietly. Victor paused, his hand halfway to his collar. For a moment, just a moment, something that might have been regret crossed his face. Or maybe it was just annoyance at being caught in the social misstep. With Victor, it was getting harder to tell the difference. Right. I know, I'm sorry. I've been slammed. He shook his head, already constructing the narrative that would make this not his fault. This Riverside deal it's a nightmare. Henderson's threatening to pull out the environmental review is taking forever, and the city suddenly decided they care about affordable housing quotas. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'll make it up to you this weekend. We'll do something nice. You said that last weekend, did I? Victor loosened his tie completely now, pulling it free from his collar with a smooth, practiced motion. Then we'll definitely do it this time. Maybe that place in Efston. You like the Italian one with the patio. I don't like Italian food, Victor. You do? He stopped walking, turned. His expression shifted from distracted to confused, as if she just told him the sky was green or water flowed uphill. What? I don't like Italian food, Lydia repeated, and hearing herself say it out loud felt strange, like confessing something scandalous instead of stating a simple preference. I never have. You're thinking of your mother. She loves Italian food. I've been eating it for 15 years because you like it. Victor stared at her as if she'd started speaking another language. His phone buzzed in his hand once, twice, but for the first time all evening he didn't look at it. You're saying you've never liked Italian food? He said slowly. I'm saying I've been eating it because making you happy seemed more important than what I wanted. The silence stretched between them like a gulf. Outside, thunder rolled across the lake, low and threatening, the sound traveling through the windows and into Lydia's chest, where it settled like a weight. Victor's jaw tightened, clear as throat that small tell he had when he was trying to decide whether something was worth his time, worth the energy it would take to engage. Okay, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Then we'll go somewhere else. Pick a place. Send me the name. I honestly don't care. I honestly don't care. The words, that was all it took. Lydia felt something crack open inside her chest. Not the sharp, clean break of a bone snapping, but the slow, splintering collapse of wood that had been rotting from the inside for years, held together only by force of will and the fear of what would happen when it finally gave way. She reached for the counter to steady herself, and her hand knocked against one of the champagne flutes she'd set out hours ago. The expensive crystal ones they'd received as a wedding gift from Victor's Aunt Margaret, who died 3 years ago without ever knowing her nephew had stopped drinking champagne because it gave him headaches. The glass fell. The crystal hit the Italian marble floor, the marble Lydia had chosen from a quarry in Carrara, spending weeks reviewing samples until she found the perfect shade of white, with just the faintest veins of grey, and it shattered with a sound like a small explosion. Pieces scattered everywhere, under the table, across the floor, littering in the candlelight like tiny accusatory eyes. One fragment skittered all the way to Victor's feet, spinning twice before coming to rest against the toe of his $1,500 Oxford. Victor didn't move, didn't ask if she was okay, didn't bend down to help pick up the pieces, or offer to get the broom, or do any of the small instinctive things a person does when someone they love is surrounded by broken glass. He just looked at the mess, then at her with an expression that might have been annoyance, or might have been nothing at all. The blankness was worse than anger. Anger would have at least been in the motion, a sign that he felt something. Anything. I'll get it later, Lydia whispered. Yeah, okay. Victor turned back toward the bedroom, already dismissing the moment, already moving on to whatever was next on his mental checklist. I need to shower. I have a 7:00 a.m. call with the Singapore office. And then he was gone, disappearing down the hallway toward the master suite, toward the bathroom with the rainfall shower and the heated marble floors and the towels Lydia had special ordered from some boutique in Paris, because Victor once mentioned in passing that he preferred Egyptian cotton with a specific thread count. Lydia stood in the kitchen, surrounded by broken glass and cold food and candles that wouldn't quit burning, no matter how much she wanted, everything to just go dark. She didn't cry. She'd stopped crying years ago. Or maybe she'd just forgotten how. The way you forget how to speak a language you haven't used since childhood. Instead, she walked carefully around the shattered crystal to the dining room, her heels clicking against the marble with each step, and sat down in the chair she had never once used to eat alone. The storm raged outside, battering the windows, making the whole building sway just slightly, a movement you couldn't see, but could feel if you paid attention, if you were still enough. Inside, Lydia felt nothing but a terrible, clarifying silence. She woke the next morning to an empty bed. Victor's side hadn't been slept in, which meant he'd taken the guest room again. It used to bother her those nights when he couldn't even pretend they still shared the same space, when the distance between them became literally architectural, walls and doors and the cold comfort of separate mattresses. Now it was just routine, easier than negotiating the vast, uncomfortable territory of a king-size bed, built for intimacy they no longer knew how to perform. Lydia dragged herself to the bathroom and studied her reflection in the mirror. 38 years old, still beautiful, people said, though the compliment always carried the weight of surprise. Still beautiful, as if youth were the only currency that mattered, as if she'd somehow cheated time by maintaining her cheekbones and the green eyes Victor had once written poetry about. Bad poetry, she discovered. She'd found the old letters last year while organizing his office for the cleaning service, tucked in a drawer beneath tax documents and mortgage statements. Your eyes are like emeralds in a sea of light. Your laugh is music that makes my soul dance. She'd laughed out loud when she read them, a sharp, bitter sound that had echoed in the empty room. When had Victor last made her laugh? When had he last looked at her long enough to notice the color of her eyes? She showered under water hot enough to hurt, then dressed in tailored black pants and a cream silk blouse, the uniform of invisible elegance. She perfected it over the years. How to look expensive and unobtrusive at the same time, how to blend seamlessly into the background of Victor's life without disappearing completely. Except she had disappeared. That was the whole problem. Downstairs, Victor was already gone. A note on the counter written in his efficient, angular handwriting. Meeting in New York back Thursday. V. Not love Victor. Not even see you soon, or take care, or any of the small pleasantries people offered when they left the people they supposedly loved, just an initial. Like she was his assistant and this was an office memo about a schedule change. Lydia crumpled a note and threw it in the trash, watching it land on top of the eggshells and coffee grounds. From breakfast she hadn't eaten. The penthouse felt enormous around her. 4,000 square feet of white walls and designer furniture and carefully curated art she'd chosen from galleries Victor never visited. She'd poured herself into this space, every lamp, every throw pillow, every book on the custom shelves that lined the library wall. She tried to build something that felt like home, like the life she'd imagined when she was 23 and stupid enough to believe that love and money could create happiness. But you couldn't build a home out of objects. You couldn't design intimacy with the right shade of gray or the perfect mid-century, modern credenza or the vintage Moroccan rug you'd found at an estate sale and had shipped from an auction house in London. Her phone buzzed against the counter. A text from Rachel, her best friend since their sophomore year at Northwestern. Coffee. I'm working from home today. Come save me from spreadsheets and existential dread. Lydia hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. Rachel was the only person who knew the truth about her marriage, or at least some version of it. The sanitized version Lydia could stand to say out loud without feeling like she was betraying Victor or herself or the life they'd built together. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe she'd been sanitizing everything for so long she'd forgotten what the real version looked like, what the truth tasted like when you said it, without filtering out all the parts that made you look weak or foolish, or like you'd wasted 15 years on a man who'd forgotten how to see you. I'll be there in 30, she typed back. Rachel lived in Wicker Park in a 3-story brownstone she'd bought 8 years ago, before the neighborhood got too expensive for anyone with a soul and a normal salary. She answered the door in black leggings and an oversized Northwestern sweatshirt that had seen better days. Her curly auburn hair piled on top of her head in a knot that defied both gravity and logic. "You look like hell," Rachel said immediately, stepping aside to let her in. "Good morning to you too. I'm serious. You look like you haven't slept in a week." Rachel closed the door and followed Lydia by.